In a small animal shelter surrounded by mysteries from the past, a heartbroken young woman and a dog with eyes that hold secrets come together on an unexpected journey. Music, hidden codes and a secret that could change history. Will Emma and Max be able to unravel the puzzles before time runs out? Discover the power of unlikely connections and buried secrets in this thrilling plot. The late autumn wind whistled through the chain-link fences of Maple Creek Animal Shelter, carrying with it the last remnants of fallen leaves. In the corner of the yard, a medium-sized mixed-breed dog dug methodically, his paws moving with practiced precision. His fur, a mottled pattern of brown and white, was slightly matted despite the shelter staff's best efforts to keep him groomed. But it wasn't his appearance that drew attention, it was his eyes, deep pools of amber that seemed to hold stories untold. This was Max, known among the shelter workers as the Soulful One. Unlike the other dogs who bounded eagerly toward visitors, Max maintained a dignified distance, watching the world with an air of patient waiting. Between his paws lay a tattered blue plush toy, worn beyond recognition but guarded with fierce devotion. Emma Parker stood at the shelter's entrance, her guitar case slung over one shoulder, trying to gather the courage to push open the door. At 17, she was tall for her age, with auburn hair that fell in waves past her shoulders and green eyes that held a shadow of recent grief. 6 months had passed since her father's funeral, but the weight of his absence still pressed against her chest like a physical thing. The volunteer orientation was scheduled to start in 5 minutes. Emma had signed up on impulse, desperate to fill the endless afternoons that used to be occupied by guitar lessons with her dad. Now his guitar, the one she carried, felt both like a lifeline and a reminder of everything she'd lost. "You must be Emma," a warm voice called out. A woman in her 40s with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail approached the entrance. "I'm Lisa, the shelter director. We spoke on the phone." Emma managed a small smile, grateful for the interruption of her thoughts. "Yes, thank you for having me. We're always happy to have new volunteers," Lisa said, holding the door open. "Especially ones willing to work with our special cases." The interior of the shelter was modest but clean, with walls painted in cheerful yellows and blues. Photos of successful adoptions created a hopeful collage near the reception desk. The barking of dogs echoed from the kennels beyond, a cacophony of eager greetings and territorial warnings. "Special cases?" Emma asked, following Lisa through the corridor. "Dogs who need a little extra patience," Lisa explained. "Like Max. He's been with us for 4 months now. Found near Miller's Woods, out by the old cabins." She paused, studying Emma's face. "There's something about him, he's not aggressive, just waiting for something. Or someone." They reached the outdoor exercise area, where Max was still digging, his tattered toy placed carefully beside him. Upon their approach, he lifted his head, and Emma felt an unexpected jolt of recognition in those amber eyes. It wasn't just sadness she saw there, it was longing, the same kind that gripped her heart when she thought of her father. "He does this every day," Lisa said softly. "Digs these holes, always in different spots. We fill them in, and he starts again the next day. The only thing he seems to care about is that old toy." Emma set her guitar case down carefully, and the movement caught Max's attention. He stopped digging, head tilted slightly as he studied her. There was something about his posture, alert but not fearful, interested but maintaining his distance, that reminded her of herself these past months. "Can I?" Emma hesitated, then finished her question. "Can I sit with him for a while?" Lisa's expression softened. "Of course. He usually keeps his distance, but..." She trailed off as Max, to her evident surprise, took a few tentative steps toward Emma. Emma lowered herself to the ground, not making eye contact, just letting her presence be known. After a moment, she unzipped her guitar case, more out of habit than intention. Max's ears perked up at the sound. "He's never shown this much interest in a new volunteer before," Lisa remarked, watching as Max inched closer, his precious toy still held gently between his teeth. Emma's fingers found their way to the guitar strings, and almost without thinking, she began to play a simple melody, the first song her father had taught her. The notes drifted across the yard, mingling with the autumn breeze, and Max froze, the toy dropping from his mouth. For a moment, everything was still. Then Max let out a soft whine, a sound so full of emotion that Emma's fingers stumbled on the strings. Their eyes met, and in that moment, something passed between them, a recognition of shared loss, of waiting, of hoping. "Well," Lisa whispered, watching the scene unfold, "I think we might have found exactly what both of you needed." As the sun began to set over Maple Creek, casting long shadows across the shelter yard, Emma continued to play softly, and Max settled down beside her, closer than he'd allowed anyone in months. His toy lay forgotten in the grass, and for the first time since arriving at the shelter, he stopped digging, as if he'd finally found what he'd been searching for all along. Neither Emma nor Max knew it yet, but this was just the beginning of a story that would unravel the mysteries of both their pasts, leading them down a path of healing neither could have imagined. For now, though, they simply sat together in the fading light, two souls finding unexpected comfort in each other's company, while the autumn wind carried away the last notes of a father's song. Emma returned to the shelter the next day, her father's guitar feeling lighter on her shoulder than it had in months. The morning fog still clung to Maple Creek streets, wrapping the small town in a dreamlike haze that matched her state of mind. She couldn't stop thinking about Max's reaction to her music yesterday, that moment of connection that had felt almost supernatural. The shelter was already bustling with activity when she arrived. Lisa greeted her with a warm smile and a stack of folders under her arm. "Emma. Perfect timing. I was just going through some of our records." She hesitated, then added, "including Max's." Emma's heart quickened. "Did you find anything about where he came from?" "Not much," Lisa admitted, leading her to a small office cluttered with papers and coffee cups. "The police report says he was found near old Miller's cabin, but..." She rifled through one of the folders. "The strange thing is, he wasn't malnourished or injured. Whoever had him before took good care of him." A volunteer with bright red hair poked her head into the office. "Lisa, the vet's here for the vaccinations." "Thanks, Ruby. I'll be right there." Lisa turned back to Emma. "Why don't you spend some time with Max? He's in the exercise yard. Maybe try playing for him again." Emma nodded, but her mind was already racing with questions. Old Miller's cabin. Something about that name tugged at her memory, but she couldn't place it. In the exercise yard, Max was at his usual spot, methodically digging. Today's hole was near the eastern fence, deeper than yesterday's. His toy lay beside him, its blue fabric faded to almost gray in the morning light. When he saw Emma, his tail gave a slight wag, not the exuberant greeting other dogs offered, but a quiet acknowledgement that meant more somehow. "Hey, boy," Emma said softly, settling down in the dewy grass. She pulled out her guitar, and Max immediately stopped digging, those soulful eyes fixed on her hands. This time, she played a different song, one her father had written himself. The melody was simple but haunting, a tune he'd composed after her mother left when Emma was just 5. She'd never learned the words, he'd always hummed it instead of singing. As the notes drifted across the yard, Max's reaction was immediate and startling. He whined, a high, keening sound that made Emma's fingers freeze on the strings. Then he rushed to his hole and began digging with renewed urgency, his paws sending dirt flying. "Max? What is it?" The dog looked back at her, then at the hole, then grabbed his toy and dropped it at her feet. Emma picked it up, turning it over in her hands. In all the wear and tear, she hadn't noticed before that it had a small pocket sewn into its side, now caked with dirt. "Emma?" A new voice called from the shelter door. "I thought I recognized that song." She looked up to see Daisy Chen, her best friend since elementary school, walking toward her. Daisy was everything Emma wasn't: outgoing, effortlessly confident, always perfectly put together even in the shelter's required volunteer t-shirt. "Hey, Deus. I didn't know you were volunteering today. Just dropped by to check on you," Daisy said, sitting beside her. Her dark eyes were concerned. "You haven't played that song since." "Since Dad," Emma finished quietly. "I know. But something about Max, he seems to recognize it somehow." Daisy watched as Max continued to dig, his determination evident in every movement. "That's weird, right? I mean, how could he know your dad's song?" Before Emma could answer, a deep voice called from the parking lot. "Morning, ladies." Henry Cooper, the elderly owner of Cooper's Hardware on Main Street, was making his way toward them, carrying a large bag of dog food. His weathered face crinkled with a smile as he set down his delivery. "Mr. Cooper," Emma greeted him. "I didn't know you helped at the shelter." "Oh, been dropping off supplies for years," he said, then noticed Max. "Well, now. Haven't seen this fellow looking so lively before." Emma felt a sudden urge to ask him about old Miller's cabin. Henry Cooper had lived in Maple Creek his entire life. He seemed to know everyone and everything about the town. "Mr. Cooper, what do you know about the cabin out in Miller's Woods? The one where they found Max?" The old man's smile faded slightly. "Old Richard Miller's place. Funny you should ask. Your father used to head out there pretty regular, few years back. Always thought it was odd, him making those trips way out there, especially in the bad weather." Emma's breath caught. "My dad? But he never mentioned." "Richard was a bit of a hermit," Henry continued, his voice softening with memory. "Lived out there alone after his wife passed, must be 20 years now. Good man, though. Used to come into the shop every few months for supplies. Always had a dog with him, come to think of it." He glanced at Max, who had stopped digging and was watching them intently. "Matter of fact." A crash from inside the shelter interrupted him, followed by barking and Lisa's voice calling for help. Henry straightened up. "Better go see what that's about. But you know, Emma, if you're curious about Richard's place, I might have some old photos in the shop. He used to pay his bills with incredible wood carvings. Still got a few of them." As Henry hurried inside, Emma looked down at Max's toy in her hands, then at the hole he'd been digging. Something was there, just beyond her grasp, a connection she couldn't quite see yet. Daisy touched her arm gently. You okay? You've got that look." "What look?" "The one you get when you're about to do something either really brave or really crazy." Emma stood up, brushing grass from her jeans. "I need to see that cabin." "What?" "Emma, no. It's probably dangerous, and your mom would freak out if, my dad went there, Deus. Regularly. And now Max." She gestured at the dog, who had picked up his toy again and was looking at her with those knowing eyes. "There's something he's trying to tell us. I can feel it." Daisy sighed, the sound equal parts exasperation and resignation. "Fine. But we do this smart. We research first, okay? Maybe talk to Mr. Cooper some more." She paused. "And you know I'm coming with you, right?" Emma managed a small smile, her first genuine one in days. "I know." As if sensing a decision had been made, Max let out a soft bark. The morning fog had finally lifted, revealing a clear autumn sky above Maple Creek. Somewhere in the distance, church bells chimed the hour, their sound carrying across town to the shelter yard where two teenagers and a dog with secrets stood at the beginning of a path that would lead them deep into the past, and maybe, just maybe, toward healing. Emma clutched Max's toy, feeling the strange weight of its hidden pocket. Whatever her father's connection was to Richard Miller and this mysterious dog, she was going to find out. She owed Max that much. She owed herself that much, too. Cooper's hardware store stood like a time capsule on Main Street, its red brick facade unchanged since Emma's childhood. The brass bell above the door chimed as she and Daisy entered, stirring dust motes in the afternoon sunlight. The familiar scent of wood shavings and metal polish brought back memories of weekend trips with her father, his calloused hands pointing out different tools, teaching her their names and uses. "Just a minute." Henry Cooper's voice called from the back room. The girls exchanged glances as they heard shuffling and the sound of boxes being moved. Emma ran her fingers along a shelf of carved wooden figures, birds in flight, leaping deer, howling wolves. She'd always admired them, but had never known their origin. Now, knowing they might have come from Richard Miller, she studied them with new interest. "There you are," Henry emerged, carrying a weathered cardboard box. "Been keeping these safe for years. Never could bring myself to get rid of them." He set the box on the counter, revealing a collection of old photographs, receipts, and more wooden carvings. Emma lifted out a photograph, its edges worn soft with age. It showed a cabin nestled among towering pines, smoke curling from its chimney. On the porch sat an elderly man with a gentle smile, and beside him. "That's Max," Emma breathed. The dog in the photo was younger, his fur less gray, but those eyes were unmistakable. "Mr. Cooper, when was this taken?" Henry adjusted his glasses, peering at the image. "Must be about 2 years ago. Your father took that picture, actually. Said Richard needed it for some paperwork." Daisy, who had been sorting through the box, held up a carved wooden music box. "Look at this, Em." The craftsmanship was exquisite, delicate vines and leaves twined around its edges, and on its lid was carved a scene of a man playing guitar while a dog sat listening. Emma's hands trembled as she opened it. A familiar melody began to play. That's my dad's song," she whispered. "The same one she'd played for Max." Henry nodded slowly. "Richard was working on that for months. Your father would hum that tune whenever he visited, and Richard said he had to capture it somehow. Was going to be a Christmas gift, I think, but..." He trailed off, his expression clouding. "But what happened to Richard?" Daisy asked gently. Before Henry could answer, Emma's phone buzzed with a text from Lisa, "Emergency at shelter. Need all volunteers. Please come if you can." "We have to go," Emma said reluctantly, but her mind was racing with questions. "Mr. Cooper, could we come back tomorrow? I'd like to know more about Richard and my dad." "Of course," Henry smiled, but there was something sad in his eyes. "And Emma? Take the music box. It was meant for your family anyway." At the shelter, they found Lisa in her office, surrounded by papers and looking more stressed than usual. The usually warm room felt cold with tension. "What's wrong?" Emma asked, still clutching the wooden music box. Lisa looked up, her face drawn. "The county's cutting our funding. We have 3 months to either find new sponsors or..." She couldn't finish the sentence. "Or what?" Daisy demanded. "Or we'll have to close. The dogs will be transferred to larger facilities in different cities." Lisa's voice cracked slightly. "Including Max." Emma felt her heart drop. "No. There has to be something we can do. We're organizing a community meeting next week," Lisa explained. "But unless we can raise significant funds or find a major donor." She noticed the box in Emma's hands. "What's that?" Before Emma could respond, barking erupted from the kennels, not the usual afternoon chorus, but urgent, alarmed sounds. They rushed to investigate and found Max in his run, pawing frantically at the gate. The moment he saw Emma, he quieted, but his eyes were fixed on the music box. Emma knelt by his gate, opening the box. As the melody played, Max's behavior changed. He stopped pawing and sat, head tilted, listening intently. Then he went to his bed in the corner and began nosing at something beneath it. "Can I go in?" Emma asked Lisa, who nodded, unlocking the gate. Under Max's bed, partially hidden by his blanket, was an old leather wallet. The material was cracked and weathered, but when Emma opened it, the contents were intact, a few faded photographs, some business cards, and a handwritten note on yellowed paper. "That wasn't there during morning cleaning," Lisa said, puzzled. "He must have had it hidden somewhere else." Emma unfolded the note with trembling fingers. The handwriting was shaky but legible. Asterisk to whoever finds this, if you're reading these words, I'm probably gone. The dog with you, his name is Maxwell, is more than just a companion. He's a guardian of memories and a keeper of promises. There's more to find, if you know where to look. The music will guide you. Richard Miller. Emma looked at Max, who had settled beside her, his head resting against her knee. His eyes seemed to hold 1,000 unspoken words. "Emma," Daisy said softly, "look at this." She held up one of the business cards from the wallet. It was her father's old contracting card, but on the back was a series of numbers, written in her father's distinctive handwriting. Lisa cleared her throat. "I have to finish the paperwork for the county, but..." She hesitated. "Whatever you two are investigating, just be careful. And remember, we're running out of time here." As they left the shelter that evening, the setting sun painted Maple Creek streets in shades of gold and shadow. Emma carried the music box in one hand and the wallet in the other, while Daisy studied the mysterious numbers. "It's not a phone number," Daisy mused. "Maybe coordinates? Or a date?" Emma stopped walking, struck by a sudden thought. Or it could be musical notes. She opened the music box again, listening carefully to her father's melody. Dad always said music was like a secret language. What if he left a message in the song itself? Daisy finished, her eyes widening. The autumn wind rustled through the trees lining Main Street, carrying with it the promise of answers yet to be discovered. Back at the shelter, Max sat in his run, watching the sunset through the fence, his patched toy beside him. For the first time since arriving at the shelter, he didn't dig a single hole that day. Instead, he waited, knowing that the girl with the guitar was finally beginning to understand the truth, a truth that connected 3 lives through music, memory, and an unbreakable bond of loyalty that even death couldn't sever. Emma sat cross-legged on her bedroom floor, surrounded by sheet music and her father's old notebooks. The wooden music box played softly on her desk, its melody mixing with the sound of rain against her window. It was past midnight, but sleep felt impossible with all the pieces of the puzzle spread before her. "The numbers have to mean something," she muttered, comparing them to her father's musical notations. Beside her, a cup of tea had long gone cold, forgotten in the intensity of her focus. Her phone lit up with a text from Daisy, still awake. "Found something interesting about Richard Miller online." Emma quickly called her friend, keeping her voice low to avoid waking her mother down the hall. "What did you find?" "So get this," Daisy whispered, the excitement clear in her voice. Richard Miller wasn't just some hermit in the woods. He was a composer before he moved to Maple Creek. "I found an old article about him. He wrote music for films in the 70s. Emma's heart raced as she looked at the numbers again, 4725136. "Daisy, what if these aren't just random numbers? What if they're a musical sequence?" "You mean like notes?" "Not exactly. More like..." Emma picked up her guitar, placing it gently in her lap. "More like positions in the melody. Dad always said music was mathematics at its core." She played the song from the music box slowly, counting each measure. On her 7th attempt, something clicked. "The numbers, they're telling us which measures to focus on. It's like a code." "Can you decode it now?" Daisy asked. "I need to write it down properly first. Meet me at the shelter tomorrow morning. There's something else I want to check with Max." After hanging up, Emma couldn't resist opening her father's old leather journal. She'd avoided reading it since his death, but now she carefully turned its pages, looking for any mention of Richard Miller. Near the back, she found an entry dated just 6 months before the accident, visited Richard today. He's getting weaker, but his spirit remains strong. Maxwell watched over him as always. The music box is nearly complete, hope Em will understand someday. Some gifts take time to be ready for. Emma's vision blurred with tears. She'd always wondered why her father had seemed distracted in those final months, taking mysterious trips that he never explained. Now she was beginning to understand, he'd been helping someone, just as he always did. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Emma arrived at the shelter early, clutching her father's journal and the music box. She found Lisa already there, hanging posters for the upcoming community meeting. Any luck with potential donors? Emma asked, helping her straighten a poster. Lisa shook her head. Not yet. But we did get some interesting news about Richard Miller's property. Apparently, it's been in legal limbo since his death. No clear heir. Emma's hand froze on the poster. The cabin? It's just been sitting there. The county's been trying to sort it out. Strange thing is, there was supposed to be a will, but no one could find it. Lisa studied Emma's face. You're still planning to go out there, aren't you? Before Emma could respond, Ruby rushed in from the kennels. Lisa. Max is refusing to eat again. They hurried to Max's run, where the dog lay beside his untouched breakfast bowl, the patched toy between his paws. But when he saw Emma, he immediately stood, tail wagging slightly. Hey, boy, Emma said softly, entering his run. She sat beside him, opening the music box. As the melody played, she watched his reactions carefully. When certain notes sounded, his ears twitched forward, and his head tilted in that peculiar way she'd come to recognize. Look at this, she showed Lisa the numbers on the business card. Each one corresponds to a specific measure in the song. And Max, he reacts to those exact parts. Lisa frowned. But why? What's so special about those particular measures? I think. Emma began, but was interrupted by Daisy's arrival. You need to see this. Daisy rushed in, brandishing her tablet. I found more articles about Richard Miller. He didn't just compose film scores, he was famous for using musical cryptography. Using what? Ruby asked, joining them. Musical codes, Daisy explained. He would hide messages in his compositions. It was like his signature thing in Hollywood. Then, 20 years ago, he just disappeared. Came here. Emma looked at Max, who was now sitting alert, his eyes fixed on the music box. He didn't disappear, she said slowly. He was hiding. The question is, from what? Or who? A commotion at the shelter's front desk interrupted them, raised voices and the sound of papers being shuffled. Lisa hurried to investigate, returning moments later with a troubled expression. County Inspector, she said quietly. They're moving up their timeline. We now have only 6 weeks to secure funding, or... She glanced at Max, unable to finish the sentence. Emma felt a sudden urgency. The mysteries of Richard Miller, her father's involvement, and Max's strange behavior, it all had to be connected. And now they were racing against time to uncover the truth. I need to work on decoding this melody, she said, standing up. And then we need to visit that cabin. I'll help with the decoding, Daisy offered. 2 sets of eyes are better than 1. Lisa looked between them, then at Max. Whatever you're onto, just remember what's at stake. It's not just Max, all our dogs need help. Emma nodded, her mind already working on the musical puzzle. As they left Max's run, she glanced back to see him returning to his toy, nudging it gently. In the morning light, she noticed something she hadn't before, tiny holes in the toy's fabric, too regular to be from wear and tear. Almost like. Daisy, she called. Do you still have that magnifying glass in your locker? I think there's something else hidden in Max's toy. The autumn morning stretched ahead of them, full of possibilities and mysteries waiting to be unraveled. In her pocket, Emma's fingers brushed against her father's journal, and she could almost hear his voice, "Some gifts take time to be ready for." She was ready now. Ready to decode the melody, ready to uncover the truth about Richard Miller, and ready to save not just Max, but the entire shelter. The only question was, would 6 weeks be enough time? The shelter's break room had been transformed into an impromptu investigation headquarters. Emma and Daisy hunched over the worn table, with Max's toy carefully placed between them. Morning light streamed through the window, illuminating dust particles that danced around their makeshift workspace. "Hold it steady," Daisy murmured, adjusting her magnifying glass over the toy's seams. The holes Emma had noticed formed a distinct pattern along the edge, barely visible to the naked eye. "They're not random," Emma said, sketching the pattern in her notebook. "Look, they're grouped in sets of 3, with different spacing between each group." Max watched from his position by the door, where Lisa had allowed him to stay after seeing his distress when they'd borrowed his toy. His eyes never left the blue plush object, but he made no move to reclaim it. "It's Morse code," Daisy suddenly exclaimed. 3 dots, 3 dashes, these holes are Morse code. Emma's heart raced as she grabbed her phone, pulling up a Morse code translator. "Quick, read me the pattern from left to right." As Daisy called out the sequences, Emma's fingers flew over her phone's keyboard. The message slowly emerged, "Beneath hollow pine 3rd stone left, coordinates," Emma breathed. It has to be talking about something at the cabin. A knock at the door made them both jump. Henry Cooper stood there, holding a cardboard box. "Hope I'm not interrupting," he said, eyes crinkling with a knowing smile. "Thought you might want to see these." He placed the box on the table, carefully removing several old newspapers. "Found these while cleaning the store's basement. Articles about Richard from his Hollywood days." The yellowed papers told a fascinating story. Richard Miller hadn't just been a composer, he'd been a legendary figure in the film industry, known for hiding elaborate codes in his soundtracks. One headline caught Emma's eye: "Miller's music leads to missing masterpiece." He used his compositions to hide the location of a stolen painting, Henry explained. Helped the FBI recover it. But after that, he shuffled through more clippings. After that, he started receiving threats. Someone thought he knew too much about something else that had gone missing. "So he came here to hide," Daisy said. But what was he hiding from? Or what was he hiding? Before Henry could respond, Lisa burst into the room. "Emma, you need to see this." She held up a letter. "The county's offering to buy the shelter property. They want to build a shopping center." Emma felt her stomach drop. But what about the dogs? They'd be transferred to other shelters across the state. Lisa's voice cracked slightly. "They're offering enough money to pay off our debts, but..." "No," Emma said firmly. "There has to be another way. Mr. Cooper, you said Richard helped find a missing painting. What if he left something valuable behind? Something that could help save the shelter?" Henry's expression grew serious. There were rumors. Richard had connections to some wealthy art collectors. Before he died, he told me he'd left something important behind, something that would help the right person at the right time. Max suddenly stood, letting out a soft whine. His eyes fixed on the music box still sitting on Emma's backpack. "The musical code," Emma said, grabbing her guitar. "We need to finish decoding it now." She played the melody again, this time focusing on the measures indicated by her father's numbers. Daisy recorded each note, while Henry listened intently. "Wait," the old man said. "Play that sequence again, but slower." Emma complied, and Henry's eyes widened. "I know that pattern. It's similar to one Richard used in his most famous film score, the one about the missing artwork." Working together, they transcribed the notes, converting them into letters using Richard's known cryptography method. Another message emerged: Truth lies in harmony below where friendship never dies, below, Daisy repeated. Just like the Morse code message, beneath hollow pine. Emma looked at Max, who had moved closer to the table. You've been trying to tell us all along, haven't you? With all that digging, you were showing us to look beneath things. A commotion from the front of the shelter interrupted them, raised voices and the sound of official-sounding footsteps. The county representatives, Lisa whispered. They're here for a final inspection. Emma made a quick decision. Mr. Cooper, how well do you remember the path to Richard's cabin? Like the back of my hand. Used to deliver supplies to him every month. Can you take us there? Today. Henry glanced at the approaching footsteps, then back at Emma. Meet me at the hardware store in an hour. Bring the music box and Max's toy. Lisa touched Emma's arm. Whatever you're planning, be careful. And hurry. Once those papers are signed. We'll find something, Emma promised. Max didn't keep these secrets all this time for nothing. As they quickly packed up their evidence, Emma caught sight of her reflection in the window. She looked different somehow, more determined, more like her father. He'd always said that music had the power to change lives. Maybe this time, it could save them too. Max followed them to the door, his toy once again clutched gently in his mouth. The morning sun had risen fully now, casting long shadows across the shelter's yard, shadows that pointed west, toward Miller's woods and the cabin that held their answers. Ready? Daisy asked, shouldering her backpack. Emma nodded, her father's journal secure in her pocket and the music box in her hands. Ready. It's time to find out what Richard Miller and my dad were protecting. As they left through the shelter's side door, Emma could hear the county officials' voices growing louder in Lisa's office. They had hours, at most, before decisions would be made that could change everything. The race to save the shelter, and to uncover the truth, was officially on. Miller's woods loomed before them, its autumn canopy creating a tunnel of red and gold. Henry Cooper's old pickup truck rattled to a stop at the end of a weathered dirt road, the path ahead too narrow for vehicles. Emma clutched the wooden music box tighter as Max stood alert in the truck bed, his nose twitching in the crisp air. This is as far as we can drive, Henry said, killing the engine. About a mile's walk from here. Richard always said he liked the solitude, kept the curious folks away. As they unloaded their backpacks, dark clouds gathered overhead, threatening rain. Daisy checked her phone. No signal out here. Perfect. Richard liked it that way too, Henry chuckled, shouldering a worn canvas bag. Said the modern world was too noisy for proper thinking. The path ahead was barely visible, overgrown with 2 years of neglect. Max jumped down from the truck bed, his toy secure in his mouth, and immediately took the lead, trotting ahead with purpose. He knows the way, Emma realized. He's been waiting to show us. They followed Max deeper into the woods, the temperature dropping as the trees grew denser. Emma found herself studying the ground, looking for signs of her father's past visits. How many times had he walked this same path, carrying supplies or simply coming to spend time with a lonely old man? Your dad, Henry said, as if reading her thoughts, he'd come out here every other weekend, rain or shine. Called it his musical meditation time. He paused to catch his breath, leaning against a gnarled oak. Richard taught him things about music that you can't learn in books. What kind of things? Emma asked, helping steady the older man. Secret things. Ways of hearing what's hidden between the notes. Richard used to say that every piece of music was like a letter waiting to be opened. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Max stopped suddenly, his ears perking up. He turned off the main path, heading toward a massive pine tree that stood slightly apart from the others. The hollow pine, Daisy whispered, pulling out their notes. From the Morse code message. The tree was ancient, its trunk wider than Henry's truck. Near its base, partially hidden by undergrowth, was a deep hollow large enough for a person to stand in. Third stone left, Emma recalled, scanning the ground. Scattered around the tree's base were several large rocks, half buried in years of fallen needles. Together, they cleared the debris, counting the stones from the hollow. The third one shifted slightly under Emma's touch. "Help me move it," she called. Henry and Daisy joined her, and together they rolled the heavy stone aside, revealing a metal box sunk into the earth. Max whined softly, pawing at the ground nearby. The box was locked, its surface etched with musical notes, the same melody from the music box. "Richard's signature tune," Henry said. "He carved it into everything he valued." Emma opened the wooden music box, comparing the patterns. "They're not exactly the same. There are extra notes here, see?" She pointed to small variations in the etched sequence. A key code, Daisy realized. Like a musical combination lock. Emma studied both melodies carefully, then pressed the etched notes in the sequence revealed by her father's numbers. A soft click, and the box opened. Inside, they found a leather-bound journal, its pages yellow with age, and several sealed envelopes. The topmost envelope bore a single name, Robert Parker, Emma's father. Her hands trembling, Emma opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, written in Richard's shaky handwriting, "Dear Robert, if you're reading this, then the worst has happened, and I've left this world without telling you everything. Your daughter Emma, she has the gift. I've heard her play, watched from my window during your lessons in the yard. She understands music the way few do, the way you do, the way I once did. The truth you've helped me protect all these years, it's time for it to come out. But it had to be her who found it. Maxwell knows, he's been guarding more than just an old man's secrets." A sudden crack of thunder made them all jump. Fat raindrops began to fall through the canopy. "We need to get to the cabin," Henry urged. "Storm's coming fast." They carefully packed the box's contents into their bags, replacing the stone to hide the hollow. Max led them onward, more urgent now, as the rain began to fall in earnest. The cabin appeared through the trees like a ghost, its windows dark and empty. Vines had begun to claim the porch where Richard Miller had sat in the photograph, but the structure remained solid. Max bounded up the steps, dropping his toy to scratch at the door. "Your father kept it maintained," Henry explained as they hurried onto the porch, shaking off the rain. "Didn't want Richard living in disrepair out here alone." The door was locked, but Henry produced an old key from his pocket. "Richard gave me this, said someone would need it someday." Inside, the cabin was a time capsule. Sheet music covered every surface, pinned to walls, stacked on tables. A grand piano dominated one corner, its surface dusty but unharmed. And everywhere, there were photographs, Richard with famous musicians, Richard accepting awards, and more recent ones, Richard with Emma's father, both men smiling over guitars. Max went straight to the piano, pawing at its bass. Emma followed, shining her flashlight where he indicated. There, carved into the wood, was another sequence of musical notes. "Look at this," Daisy called from a bookshelf. She held up a newspaper clipping, "Famous composer disappears with priceless historical documents." Emma's breath caught as she read the article. Richard Miller hadn't just gone into hiding, he'd taken something with him, something people had been searching for ever since. "He hid the truth in his music," she said slowly, looking around at the sheets of music that surrounded them. "All these compositions, they're not just songs. They're a map." Thunder crashed outside as Max settled by the piano, his toy placed carefully beside the carved notes. In that moment, as rain lashed against the windows and lightning illuminated the room in brief, brilliant flashes, Emma felt closer to understanding her father than she had since his death. They had found Richard Miller's sanctuary, but the real mystery was only beginning to unfold. Whatever secret had brought the famous composer into hiding, whatever truth her father had helped protect, it was hidden somewhere in this cabin, woven into the very music that surrounded them. And they had less than 6 weeks to unravel it all before the shelter, and Max's home, would be lost forever. The storm raged outside Richard Miller's cabin as Emma sat at the grand piano, her flashlight illuminating the carved notes on its base. The beam caught tiny grooves in the wood grain, signs of frequent playing, of countless hours spent composing at this very spot. The article mentions historical documents, Daisy said, spreading newspaper clippings across a dusty coffee table. But it doesn't specify what they were. Henry Cooper moved through the cabin with careful familiarity, lighting old oil lamps that cast warm, flickering light across the sheet music-covered walls. Richard never told me exactly what he had. Said it was safer if fewer people knew. Max had settled near the piano's pedals, his toy placed precisely between two loose floorboards. Emma noticed his positioning wasn't random, nothing about Max ever was. "Help me move this rug," she said suddenly, sliding off the piano bench. Together, they rolled back a faded Persian carpet, revealing a pattern of scratches in the wooden floor. The marks formed a perfect circle, with the piano at its center. "Look at these gouges," Daisy pointed. "The piano's been moved. Multiple times." Emma returned to the carved notes on the piano's base, then opened Richard's journal from the metal box. Inside, she found a diagram, a circle divided into 12 segments, each marked with a musical note. "It's a clock," she breathed. "Or a wheel. Each position of the piano reveals something different." Thunder crashed overhead as they positioned themselves around the heavy instrument. "On 3, Henry instructed. They pushed, and the piano rolled smoothly on hidden casters, settling into a new position with a soft click. A floorboard popped up where Max sat. Inside the small cavity was a leather folder containing sheet music, but these pages were different. Between the staves were handwritten notes in what looked like code. "There's more," Emma said, consulting the diagram. 11 more positions. Over the next hour, they moved the piano again and again, each new position revealing another hidden compartment. Some contained more sheet music, others held photographs, letters, and journal entries. Max watched it all with alert interest, moving to each new spot before they even pushed the piano. He knew, Emma realized, scratching behind Max's ears. He watched Richard hide all of this. Finally, with the piano back in its original position, they spread their findings across the floor. Emma began sorting through the sheet music, her musician's eye catching patterns others might miss. "These aren't just random compositions," she said. "Look, each piece has a different type of code embedded in it. Some use the notes themselves, others use the rhythm patterns or the dynamics markings." Daisy, who had been photographing everything with her phone, gasped suddenly. Come look at this letter." The paper was old, its creases worn soft with repeated folding. The letterhead bore an official seal, National Archives, Classified Communication. "Dear Mr. Miller," Emma read aloud. "Your expertise in musical cryptography has come to our attention. Recent developments suggest that the missing founding documents contain encoded information vital to national security. Your discretion in this matter is paramount." "Founding documents?" Henry leaned forward. "You don't mean?" "There were rumors," Daisy said, pulling up an article on her phone, which she'd downloaded before losing signal. In the 1950s, a set of personal papers belonging to Benjamin Franklin went missing from a private collection. They were supposed to contain details about a secret society he belonged to, one that had members in both America and Europe. "And Richard found them," Emma concluded. "But instead of turning them over, he..." She trailed off, looking at the sheet music surrounding them. "He hid their secrets in his music." Lightning flashed, illuminating the cabin in stark relief. In that brief, brilliant moment, Emma noticed something odd about the piano's sheet music stand, subtle markings around its edges that didn't match the rest of the wood. "Mr. Cooper, can you help me remove this?" The stand came off easily, revealing a hollow space inside the piano's music desk. There, wrapped in protective cloth, was a bundle of weathered pages covered in Franklin's distinctive handwriting. But between the pages were sheets of Richard's own musical scores, each one corresponding to a section of Franklin's text. He translated it, Emma said, wonder in her voice. He turned whatever secrets were in these documents into music, hiding them in plain sight all these years. But why? Daisy asked. Why not just turn them over to the government? Henry picked up Richard's journal, turning to the final entries. Because he discovered something in them, something he thought needed to be protected until the right time. Look at this. The journal's last pages contained a series of urgent entries. October 15th, the truth in Franklin's papers, it's bigger than anyone realized. Not just about the past, but about what's buried beneath this land. Robert understands. We have to keep it safe until someone can prove. The entry ended abruptly. 2 days later, Richard Miller had passed away. Emma's phone buzzed, they had a weak signal. A text from Lisa appeared, county officials left. Gave us 48 hours to accept their offer. Development company already has construction permits ready. 2 days, Emma said, her voice tight. We have 2 days to figure out what Richard and my dad were protecting, and why it's worth saving. Max whined softly, nudging his toy toward the scattered papers. Emma picked it up, feeling its familiar weight. The hidden pocket they'd discovered earlier, could there be more they'd missed? She turned the toy over in her hands, examining every seam in the lamplight. There, another set of tiny holes, different from the Morse code pattern. These formed a shape, a perfect circle divided into 12 segments. Like the piano positions, Daisy whispered. Emma looked around the cabin, at the hundreds of sheets of music that covered every surface. Somewhere in these compositions was the key to understanding what Richard Miller had discovered in Franklin's papers, something important enough to hide for decades, something her father had helped protect. The storm was beginning to ease, but the real tempest lay ahead. They had 48 hours to decode generations of secrets, to uncover a truth hidden in harmonies, and to save not just the shelter, but perhaps something far more significant than they'd imagined. As if sensing her thoughts, Max pressed against her leg, his steady presence a reminder of why they'd started this journey. Whatever secrets Richard Miller had hidden in his music, whatever truth lay buried in Benjamin Franklin's papers, they would find it. They had to. Time, like the final notes of a symphony, was running out. Dawn crept through the cabin's windows, casting long shadows across the sea of papers spread over the floor. Emma hadn't slept, her fingers cramped from hours of transcribing musical patterns while thunder gradually faded into the distance. Beside her, Daisy dozed fitfully on the old couch, her phone's battery long dead. The coffee's ready, Henry called softly from the small kitchen, where he discovered Richard's old percolator still worked. Max lifted his head from his vigil by the piano, nose twitching at the familiar scent. Emma stretched, her back stiff from hunching over documents all night. She'd arranged the sheet music in concentric circles, following the pattern from Max's toy. Something about the arrangement nagged at her memory. Mr. Cooper, she called, accepting a steaming mug, did my dad ever mention anything about maps? Or surveying? Henry settled into a worn armchair, his eyes distant with memory. Come to think of it, he did spend a lot of time studying old property maps of the area. Said Richard was interested in the original boundaries of Maple Creek. Emma's hands trembled slightly as she lifted Franklin's papers again. Between lines of faded text were careful drawings, circles within circles, marked with compass points and musical notations. Look at this, she said, gently waking Daisy. Franklin wasn't just writing about a secret society. He was documenting something they found here, in this region. Something they hid. Daisy blinked awake, immediately focused. What kind of something? I'm not sure yet. But these musical patterns Richard created, they're not just codes, they're coordinates. Emma grabbed her father's old journal, flipping to a dog-eared page. Dad marked the same patterns here, but as surveyor's notes. Henry leaned forward, suddenly alert. The development company. They've been doing ground surveys all around the shelter property. Lisa said they seemed especially interested in the old well field behind the building. A memory clicked into place. The county records, Daisy said, sitting up straight. Remember when we were researching the shelter's history for that school project? The property used to be much larger, but parts were sold off over the years. Except for that well field, the original deed specified it could never be developed. Max had moved to the piano, pawing at the pedals in a deliberate pattern. Emma watched him, her mind racing. Richard's last journal entry mentioned something buried beneath the land. What if Franklin Society didn't just hide documents? What if they hid something physical, something valuable enough that people are still looking for it centuries later? She returned to the piano, studying the carved notes with fresh eyes. These aren't just positions for hiding compartments. They're directions, like a compass rose made of music. Working quickly, she played each sequence, noting how the harmonies changed with each position. Listen to this progression. It's not random, it's creating a pattern of sound that maps to these drawings in Franklin's papers. Daisy had spread out photocopies of the old shelter property maps on the coffee table. The well field forms a perfect circle when you include the original boundary markers. And look, there are 12 old wells, spaced evenly around the perimeter. Just like the piano positions, Emma breathed. Richard wasn't just hiding Franklin's papers. He was preserving the key to finding whatever the secret society buried there. Henry stood abruptly. The development company, their permits include demolition of the well field. They're scheduled to begin preliminary work tomorrow morning. Emma's phone showed a text from Lisa, construction crews arriving today for initial survey. Please tell me you found something. We need to get back, Emma said, gathering the most crucial documents. But first. She turned to the piano one last time, playing the complete sequence of coded notes while Daisy recorded it on her recovered phone. The melody that emerged was hauntingly familiar, a more complex version of the tune from the music box. As the final notes faded, Max retrieved his toy and headed for the door with purpose. Wait, Daisy called, pointing to a sheet that had fluttered from Franklin's papers. It contained a series of numbers and a brief note in Richard's handwriting: the frequency matters as much as the melody. Sound travels deep. Emma carefully packed Franklin's papers and Richard's coded sheets into her backpack. The development company didn't choose that location by accident. Someone else has decoded part of this, enough to know something's there. But they don't have all the pieces, Henry said, patting Max's head. They don't have the music, or the dog who's been guarding these secrets for years. As they stepped onto the cabin's porch, the morning sun revealed a transformed landscape. The storm had cleared the air, making every detail sharp and clear. In the distance, Maple Creek was waking up, unaware of the historical treasure that might be hidden beneath its soil. 40 hours left, Daisy said, checking her phone's timer. How are we going to convince anyone to stop the development without revealing what we're looking for? Emma watched Max trotting ahead of them on the path, his toy secure in his mouth. We don't need to convince everyone. We just need to find whatever's hidden in that well field before the construction crews do. She pulled out the wooden music box, its melody now carrying new meaning. Richard and my dad spent years protecting this secret. They chose the shelter location for a reason, to keep watch over whatever's buried there. The morning breeze carried the distant sound of machinery, construction equipment being moved into place. Their discovery had given them answers, but it had also started a race against time. Somewhere beneath the shelter's well field lay a historical treasure, protected for centuries by a secret society and guarded for decades through musical codes. And they had less than 2 days to find it, armed only with a collection of coded sheet music, a mysterious map hidden in harmonies, and a dog who had been faithfully keeping these secrets far longer than anyone had realized. As they hurried back through the awakening forest, Emma felt the weight of history in her backpack, and the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. The shelter's fate, Max's future, and perhaps a piece of American history all depended on what they would do in the next 40 hours. Behind them, Richard Miller's cabin stood silent among the trees, its walls still holding countless other secrets in their sheets of music. But the most important melody, the one that might save everything, was already playing in Emma's mind, a code waiting to be broken, a map waiting to be followed to its extraordinary end. The shelter's well field stretched before them in the mid-morning sun, tall grass swaying in the aftermath of the storm. Yellow construction tape marked the perimeter, and the distant rumble of machinery served as a constant reminder of their dwindling time. Emma stood at the edge of the field, Richard's coded sheet music in one hand, her father's journal in the other. "Security guard makes rounds every 20 minutes, Daisy reported, returning from her surveillance. "Construction crews having a site meeting up front, but they'll start preliminary surveying soon." Lisa joined them, her face drawn with worry. "I've bought us a little time by insisting they need additional permits to access the well field. But it won't hold them off for long." Emma spread out the property map on the hood of Henry's truck, now parked behind the shelter. The 12 wells formed a perfect circle, just as they'd realized at the cabin. But something else caught her eye, subtle markings her father had made years ago, almost invisible unless you knew to look for them. "These notes," she said, tracing the faint pencil marks. "They're not just measurements. They're musical intervals." Max sat alertly beside the truck, his toy placed carefully on the map's corner. The morning breeze carried the scent of wet earth and the metallic tang of the approaching construction equipment. "The frequency matters as much as the melody," Emma repeated Richard's note. She pulled out her phone, opening a pitch detection app she used for tuning her guitar. What if the wells aren't just markers? What if they're tuned? Henry's eyes widened. "Richard used to bring long metal rods out here. Said he was doing maintenance on the wells, but he was tuning them," Emma finished. "Like giant pipes in an organ." Daisy grabbed her arm. Look at this." She pointed to the back of Richard's journal, where a series of concentric circles had been drawn. Each ring contained musical notes, creating a spiral pattern. "It's like a combination lock, but with sounds instead of numbers." "The wells must resonate at specific frequencies," Emma said, excitement building. "If we can match the sequence from the piano." A truck engine roared to life near the shelter's front entrance. They were running out of time. "I'll run interference with the construction crew," Lisa said. "But hurry." Emma approached the first well, her phone's microphone ready. Max followed, suddenly alert and focused. She pulled out her pitch pipe, playing the first note from Richard's sequence. The well responded with a deep, resonant hum. "It's working," she breathed. "Daisy, mark down the frequency." They moved from well to well, Emma playing notes while Daisy recorded the resonant frequencies. Max trotted ahead each time, as if he knew exactly which well they needed to check next. Daisy called urgently. "Security guards heading this way." They ducked behind Henry's truck as the guard passed, his flashlight beam sweeping across the field. Emma's heart pounded, but her mind was racing through the musical patterns. "The frequencies," she whispered once the guard had passed. "They're creating a harmonic series. But there's something else." She studied the numbers, then looked back at Franklin's papers. "These aren't just musical notes. They're depths." Henry nodded slowly. The original wells were dug to different depths. Town records never explained why. A commotion arose from the front of the shelter, raised voices and the sound of heavy equipment being moved into position. Lisa appeared around the corner, slightly out of breath. "They're insisting on starting the survey now," she reported. "Something about geological testing before they can proceed with construction." Emma looked at the well field with growing understanding. "They're not just planning to build here. They're looking for the same thing we are. But they don't have the complete sequence." Max suddenly barked, a sharp, urgent sound. He'd moved to one of the wells near the center of the field, pawing at the ground around its base. The security guard's flashlight beam appeared again, sweeping closer. "Quick," Henry said, "behind the storage shed." They crouched in the shadows as the guard passed again, his radio crackling with instructions to check the perimeter before the survey team arrived. "The geological survey," Daisy whispered. "They'll use ground-penetrating radar. If there's anything hidden down there." Emma pulled out the music box, its melody now taking on new significance. She compared it to the sequence they'd recorded from the wells. "Look at this final measure. It's not just a ending, it's coordinates. The exact center point between these three wells." Max was already there, still pawing at the ground. The morning sun had risen high enough to eliminate most shadows, and in the clear light, Emma noticed something about the grass around the well. "It's growing in a pattern," she said. "Perfect concentric circles." Henry touched the grass gently. "Different soil composition. Something underneath is affecting how it grows." A truck engine roared closer, followed by the beeping of construction equipment backing up. "The survey team's here," Lisa warned, rejoining them. "We've got minutes, at most." Emma looked at Max, then at her father's journal, understanding dawning in her eyes. "We don't need to dig. We don't even need to find what's buried here, not yet." She pulled out her phone, quickly taking photos of the grass patterns, the well positions, and most importantly, the musical sequences. "What do you mean?" Daisy asked. "Richard didn't just hide Franklin's secret. He protected it legally." Emma flipped through the shelter's original property documents. "These deed restrictions about never developing the well field, they're not just about preservation. They're about protection. If we can prove there's historical significance to this site, we can get it declared a protected landmark," Lisa finished, hope lighting her eyes. Max barked again, more urgently this time. The construction team was visible now, wheeling ground-penetrating radar equipment toward the field. "But we need proof," Daisy said. "Something we can take to the Historical Society right now." Emma looked at the musical codes, the property documents, and Franklin's papers. Then she turned to Max, who sat watching her with those knowing eyes, his toy still clutched protectively. "We have proof," she said. "We have everything Richard and my dad collected. We just need to present it in a way that will make the Historical Society act immediately." She paused, a plan forming. "And I know exactly how to do it." The construction team was at the edge of the field now. Whatever they were going to do, they had to do it fast. But as Emma gathered their evidence, she felt a certainty she hadn't experienced since beginning this journey. Richard Miller hadn't just left them a treasure map. He'd left them everything they needed to protect it, through music, through law, and through the unwavering loyalty of a dog who had guarded these secrets far longer than anyone had guessed. Now it was their turn to use those tools, not to uncover the treasure, but to ensure it remained safely hidden until the right time. Just as Richard and her father had intended all along. The Maple Creek Historical Society building stood proudly on Pine Street, its Victorian architecture a testament to the town's rich past. Emma burst through its heavy oak doors, slightly out of breath, with Daisy, Henry, and Lisa close behind. Max trotted beside them, still carrying his toy, having refused to stay at the shelter. Dr. Eleanor Walsh, the society's director, looked up from her desk with surprise. Her silver hair was pulled back in an elegant bun, and her wire-rimmed glasses couldn't hide her immediate interest in the curious group before her. "Mr. Cooper," she said, rising. "This is unexpected. And Lisa, aren't you supposed to be managing a crisis at the shelter?" "That's why we're here." Emma stepped forward, placing Richard's journal and Franklin's papers carefully on the desk. "Dr. Walsh, what do you know about Richard Miller?" The historian's eyes sharpened. "The composer? I tried to interview him several times before his death. Fascinating man, but very private. Especially about his work with musical cryptography. Because he was protecting something, Emma said, spreading out the documents. Something Benjamin Franklin and his secret society hid right here in Maple Creek. Dr. Walsh's professional composure slipped slightly. Benjamin Franklin. That's quite a claim, young lady. One we can prove, Daisy added, pulling up the photos on her phone. But we need to act fast. There's a construction crew at the shelter right now, about to survey the well field. Emma opened Richard's journal to the coded pages. Richard Miller didn't choose Maple Creek at random. He came here to protect a historical secret, one that's tied to the founding of our nation. Dr. Walsh sat down, her attention fully captured. Go on. Working together, they laid out their evidence, Franklin's papers describing the secret society, Richard's musical codes, the property documents with their strange restrictions, and the photos of the well's geometric arrangement. The wells are tuned, Emma explained, playing a recording from her phone. Each one resonates at a specific frequency. Together, they create a musical map. Dr. Walsh leaned forward, studying the documents with growing excitement. These are authentic 18th-century papers. And these musical notations. She looked up sharply. You realize what this could mean? That's why we need your help, Lisa said. The development company's permit includes demolition of the well field. Once they start their survey, they'll find whatever's buried there, Dr. Walsh finished. And based on these documents, that could be historically priceless. A text buzzed on Emma's phone, a photo from Ruby at the shelter showing the survey team setting up their equipment. Dr. Walsh, Emma said urgently, Richard Miller spent decades protecting this secret. My father helped him. They didn't hide all this evidence just to keep the treasure hidden, they were waiting for the right time to reveal it properly. Legally. Through the Historical Society, Dr. Walsh nodded, understanding dawning in her eyes. She reached for her phone. Give me 2 minutes. As she made calls, Emma knelt beside Max, who had settled near a display case containing Revolutionary War artifacts. His eyes were fixed on a particular item, a small brass compass with musical notes engraved around its edge. Dr. Walsh, Emma called softly, where did this compass come from? The historian covered her phone's mouthpiece. Found locally, about 50 years ago. No one could explain the musical engravings. Why? Emma compared the notes on the compass to Richard's sequences. Because it's part of the same code. Franklin's society didn't just hide documents, they left clues across centuries, protected by people who understood the music. Dr. Walsh's eyes widened. She spoke more urgently into her phone, then hung up. The State Historical Commission is sending a team immediately. I've also contacted the county commissioner, construction will be halted pending a full historical survey. Relief flooded through Emma, but Daisy was checking her phone with concern. They've already started the ground survey. The radar equipment is running. Dr. Walsh stood decisively. Then we'll stop them ourselves. Legally, they cannot proceed if there's an active historical investigation. She gathered the documents carefully. And thanks to you all, that investigation begins now. They rushed back to the shelter, Dr. Walsh's official car leading their small convoy. The morning had warmed into a bright autumn day, but dark clouds were gathering again on the horizon. At the well field, the survey team had already mapped a quarter of the area. Their equipment hummed ominously, sending signals deep into the earth. Dr. Walsh strode forward, her credentials displayed. Gentlemen, this site is now under the protection of the State Historical Commission. All work must cease immediately. The construction foreman stepped forward, his face darkening. We have permits which are superseded by state historical preservation laws, Dr. Walsh interrupted smoothly, handing him official documents. Especially given the evidence of Revolutionary War-era artifacts. Emma watched as the foreman's expression shifted from anger to resignation. But something about his reaction seemed off, almost as if he'd been expecting this. A sharp bark drew her attention. Max had moved to the edge of the surveyed area, where a laptop displayed the radar's initial findings. On the screen, clear geometric patterns were visible beneath the soil, patterns that matched the musical sequences exactly. "Pack it up," the foreman ordered his team, but not before Emma saw him snap a photo of the radar display with his phone. As the construction crew reluctantly began dismantling their equipment, Dr. Walsh turned to Emma with a mix of authority and excitement. "We'll need everything you've found, all the documents, the musical codes, everything. The Historical Commission will want to begin a proper investigation immediately." Emma nodded, but her mind was racing. The foreman's reaction, his quick photo of the radar results, something wasn't right. She looked at Max, who sat alert and watchful, his toy still held protectively. Richard Miller and her father hadn't just been protecting the physical treasure. They'd been protecting the secret of how to find it, how to understand what it meant. And now, despite their victory in stopping the construction, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that they'd just shown their hand to someone who'd been searching for these answers for a very long time. The clouds were moving faster now, shadows racing across the well field. They'd won this battle, saved the shelter's land from immediate development. But as Emma watched the foreman make a quiet phone call from his truck, she realized their work wasn't done. The secret was still in danger. And somewhere in Richard's remaining musical codes, in the sheets of music still covering the cabin's walls, lay the next piece of the puzzle, the key to understanding not just where the treasure was hidden, but why it had been protected so carefully for so long. Max pressed against her leg, his steady presence a reminder of all they'd discovered and all that was still hidden. The Historical Society would protect the well field now, but protecting the deeper secret, that would fall to them. Just as it had fallen to Richard Miller, to her father, and to a loyal dog who had guarded these mysteries through years of patient waiting. The real work was just beginning. Evening shadows lengthened across the shelter's parking lot as a steady stream of official vehicles finally began to depart. The State Historical Commission had spent hours documenting the well field, photographing the grounds, and examining Franklin's papers. Through it all, Max hadn't left Emma's side, his watchful gaze following every person who handled the documents. "That's the last of them," Lisa said, watching the final car pull away. "Dr. Walsh said they'll post security guards tonight. The site's officially under state protection." Emma sat on the shelter's front steps, absently turning the wooden music box in her hands. Something about the foreman's behavior kept nagging at her. Did anyone else notice how quickly he gave up? Almost like he got what he came for, Daisy finished, showing Emma her laptop screen. "I've been doing some digging." "The development company?" "It's a subsidiary of Historical Acquisition Partners, a private firm specializing in historical asset recovery." Henry Cooper settled heavily onto the step beside Emma. "Treasure hunters with fancy lawyers. But why go through all this?" Emma wondered. Why not just approach the Historical Society directly? "Because of what Richard knew," a new voice said. They turned to see Dr. Walsh returning, carrying a leather portfolio. "I've been reviewing his journal more carefully. The musical codes don't just lead to a location, they tell a story. One that certain people might not want revealed." Inside the shelter, dogs barked at approaching footsteps. Ruby appeared around the corner, looking concerned. "There's someone asking questions at the front desk. Says he's from the National Archives." Emma and Daisy exchanged glances. The letter they'd found in Richard's cabin, it had mentioned the archive's interest in Franklin's papers. "I'll handle this," Dr. Walsh said, her voice carrying quiet authority. "Emma, take these." She handed over the portfolio. "Copies I made of the most important documents. The originals will be secured at the Historical Society, but..." She glanced meaningfully at the shelter's front door. "I think Richard would want you to continue his work." As Dr. Walsh went to meet the unexpected visitor, Emma opened the portfolio. Inside were detailed photographs of Franklin's papers, copies of Richard's musical notations, and something else, a series of letters between Richard and her father dating back years. Daisy whispered urgently, "Look at this." She'd been researching on her laptop. Historical Acquisition Partners has been involved in dozens of archaeological sites across the East Coast. All connected to Revolutionary War-era artifacts. And their chief researcher? She turned the screen to show a familiar face. The construction foreman. Max suddenly stood, hackles raised. Through the shelter's windows, they could hear raised voices from the front office. "Back door," Lisa said quickly. "Now." They slipped out through the shelter's rear exit, Emma clutching the portfolio while Daisy grabbed her laptop. The autumn evening had turned cold, their breath visible in the gathering dusk. "My truck's around the corner," Henry offered, but Emma shook her head. "The cabin," she said. "We need to see what else Richard left behind." "All of it." A text lit up Emma's phone, from Dr. Walsh, "Don't trust archives claim. Papers they're asking about were reported stolen 50 years ago. Be careful." "Stolen?" Daisy breathed. "Then how did Richard get them?" "Maybe he didn't steal them," Emma said slowly. "Maybe he was protecting them from whoever did." They reached Henry's truck just as flashlight beams began sweeping the shelter's grounds. Max jumped into the truck bed without hesitation, still clutching his toy. As Henry drove carefully through Maple Creek's darkening streets, Emma read through the letters between Richard and her father. Most were brief, discussing maintenance work at the cabin or supply deliveries. But one, dated just weeks before her father's accident, stood out, *Robert, they're getting closer. The company buying properties along the creek, it's them. They never stopped looking. Emma's discovery of the musical patterns confirms what we suspected. She has your gift, and more importantly, your heart. When the time comes, she'll understand why we chose to protect rather than reveal. The truth isn't just buried in the earth. It's written in the spaces between the notes, in the harmonies that echo through time. Maxwell knows. He's always known. Keep the music safe. Richard *, the accident, Emma said quietly. Dad was driving back from the cabin that night. Henry's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Richard passed away 2 days later. We all thought it was just his time, but... Look, Daisy interrupted, pointing ahead. A black SUV was parked at the turnoff to Miller's Woods. Back roads, Henry decided, taking a sharp turn onto a narrow gravel track. Richard showed me all the old logging paths. As they wound through the darkness, Emma studied the musical notations in the portfolio. The codes weren't just coordinates, they were a story written in melody, a truth hidden in harmony. And somewhere in Richard's cabin lay the key to understanding it all. Max whined softly from the truck bed, pawing at the back window. In the glow of the brake lights, Emma could see his toy had torn slightly, revealing something metallic glinting inside. "Mr. Cooper," she said urgently, "we need to hurry. I think Max has been carrying one final secret all along." The truck rattled down the overgrown paths as clouds rolled in, obscuring the rising moon. Behind them, distant engine sound suggested they weren't the only ones heading for Richard Miller's cabin. And somewhere ahead, hidden in sheets of music and coded melodies, lay answers that could change not just their understanding of history, but the very reason it had been hidden for so long. Emma held the portfolio close, feeling the weight of generations of secrets within its pages. Her father and Richard had died protecting this truth. Now it fell to her, along with a loyal dog who had guarded these mysteries far longer than anyone had guessed, to finally uncover what made this secret worth dying for. The cabin waited ahead in the darkness, its windows dark but somehow watchful, filled with music that contained not just codes, but warnings. Warnings about a truth that some wanted buried forever, and others would do anything to possess. Richard Miller's cabin emerged from the darkness like a shadow given form, its windows reflecting the last gleams of twilight. Emma, Daisy, and Henry hurried inside, Max leading the way with determined steps. Behind them, the sound of vehicles on the main road grew closer. "Quick," Henry said, pulling the curtains closed. "We don't have much time." Emma knelt beside Max, who had finally released his toy. The torn seam revealed something metallic inside, a small key, ancient and ornate, with musical notes etched along its shaft. It was never about buried treasure, Emma realized, studying the key's pattern. The musical codes, the well field, they're all protecting something else. Something only Richard Miller could have understood. Daisy was already spreading the portfolio contents across the piano. "These letters between Richard and your dad, look at the dates. They started right after your father discovered something during a renovation project at Independence Hall." Emma's hands trembled as she read the earliest letter, Robert, "What you found hidden in that old wall, it changes everything we thought we knew about Franklin's secret society. The musical codes don't just protect locations. They protect knowledge that could rewrite history. I'll help you keep it safe. There's a shelter here, a perfect cover for watching over the site. And I have a faithful friend who understands the importance of patience. Come soon. The music is waiting." Richard headlights swept across the cabin's front yard. "Back room," Henry whispered urgently. They slipped into Richard's study just as car doors slammed outside. The study walls were covered in sheet music, but Emma's attention was drawn to the old writing desk. Its surface was carved with the same circular pattern they'd found everywhere else, 12 divisions, each marked with a musical note. "The key," she breathed, examining the desktop more closely. "There, almost invisible unless you knew to look for it, a keyhole." Max pressed against her leg as she inserted the key. It turned with a soft click, and the desktop split along its carved lines, opening like a flower to reveal a hidden compartment. Inside lay a single document, its edges brown with age, sealed with wax bearing Benjamin Franklin's personal mark. And beside it, a modern envelope addressed to Emma in her father's handwriting. Footsteps creaked on the cabin's porch. Emma opened her father's letter with shaking fingers. "My dearest Emma, if you're reading this, then you've discovered what Richard and I gave our lives to protect. The document you see is Franklin's true confession, the real reason his secret society was formed. They weren't just collectors of artifacts or protectors of treasure. They were guardians of an idea so powerful that it had to be hidden until the world was ready to understand it. The musical codes, the geometric patterns, they're all part of Franklin's discovery. A harmony he found in nature itself, a pattern that connects all things. Knowledge that, in the wrong hands, could be used to control rather than illuminate. Richard recognized the patterns in your playing years ago. He knew you'd understand not just the music, but the responsibility that comes with it. The choice is yours now, Emma. Reveal the truth, or protect it until the right time comes again. I'm so proud of you. Love always, Dad." The cabin's front door opened. Voices murmured in the main room. Emma looked at Franklin's sealed document, then at Max, who met her gaze with quiet understanding. In that moment, she knew what she had to do. She took Richard's final composition from the portfolio, the one that had been in the music box. On its back, she quickly wrote everything she'd learned about the codes, about her father and Richard, about the true purpose of Franklin's society. Then she tucked both documents into her father's journal and handed it to Daisy. "Get to Dr. Walsh," she whispered. "Through the back window. Make sure this reaches the Historical Society. What about you? I'll keep them busy. Some secrets need to be protected a while longer." Heavy footsteps approached the study door. Daisy slipped silently through the window as Emma turned to face the entrance, Max steady beside her. She placed her hand on Richard's piano, feeling the quiet power of the music it contained. The door opened. The construction foreman stood there, flanked by men in dark suits. "Miss Parker. We need to talk about what your father found." Emma's fingers found the keys, and she began to play, not just any melody, but the one that had started everything. Her father's song, the one that had first connected her to Max. The notes filled the cabin, each one carrying the weight of secrets kept through generations. Through the window, she saw Daisy disappearing into the woods with the journal. Soon, the world would know the truth about Franklin's society, about the knowledge they'd protected. But the deeper secret, the one hidden in harmonies and guarded by a faithful dog, would stay safe until the right time came. Just as Richard and her father had intended. Actually, Emma said, continuing to play as Max sat proudly beside her, I think it's time I told you a story about music. About how some melodies are meant to be heard and others are meant to keep their secrets just a little longer. Outside, the autumn wind carried her father's song across Miller's Woods, its notes joining the eternal harmony that Franklin had discovered so long ago. And in that melody lay the greatest truth of all, that some mysteries are meant not to be solved, but to be protected, passed down through generations until the world is finally ready to hear their song. The shelter was safe. The historical site would be preserved. And somewhere in the space between the notes, in the cryptic sheets of music that still lined the cabin walls, in the loyal heart of a dog who had guarded these secrets for so long, the deeper mysteries would wait. Wait for the next guardian, the next protector, the next keeper of harmonies that could change the world, when the right time finally came. Emma played on into the night, her father's song merging with all the melodies that had come before, creating a symphony of secrets, of protection, of love passed down through time. And Max, faithful Max, sat beside her, finally at peace, having delivered his last secret to exactly the right person at exactly the right time. The music, like the truth it protected, would endure. And in the end, that was the greatest treasure of all.